So hey, what's up guys? We're going to be doing today a side-by-side image comparison. It's an idea I got from W3 Schools, and you can see an example of that on the screen at the moment. So we have two images. One is with RTX on and one is RTX off, and it's basically a new technique to make light reflections, but obviously this can work with any kind of images, anything you want to compare. So the idea is basically that hovering the mouse over the picture will be going from one picture to the other. So if you find this interesting and you want to learn how to do it, or you want to see me do it step by step, I'm going to be going over how to do this right now. So I went out and searched for two images that would look good in this sort of comparison, and I found two images of I think this game is Ghost of Tsushima, with like RTX on the right and RTX off on the left. And I used Microsoft Paint to pretty much cut these two pictures, and I ended up with this picture for the RTX off and this picture for the RTX on. Okay, so once we have the two pictures that we're gonna compare, we can start with our tutorial. So I'm gonna create an index.html file. I'll use the exclamation mark enter so that VS Code will print the boilerplate code, the doc type HTML, head, metadata, and body. And then we can start making our image comparison. So first thing I want to do is create a div that's going to be the container of my two images. And this div, I'm going to give it a class of outer container. Okay, I'm immediately going to target the outer container with some border so I can see what I'm working with. So I'll create a style section at the top. I'll target the outer container and give it a border of 2 pixels solid black. I'll save and preview my my HTML document. Okay, so here's my container, and we can see at the top it has like the little border that I gave it. At the moment the container is empty, so it has no width. It has no height, it only has a width. So inside the outer container, I'm gonna start creating two other containers. One container for each picture that I want to compare. So the first thing is gonna be a div with image container 1, another div with image container 2. Inside each of these containers, I'm gonna start placing the images. I'll create an image tag, a link to the first image of RTX off, for example. Inside the second image container, I'm gonna do the same thing for the RTX on image. So image RTX on. Okay, so this is what we end up with. Okay, so next thing I want to do is place the two images one on top of the other. I'll use the technique of positioning the second image over the first image using a position absolute. So let's start giving the outer container a position of relative so that I can then have the outer container as a reference for the position absolute. So position relative to the outer container. And then I'll target the image container 1 and image container 2 and give them both a position of absolute. Okay, so this is what we end up with. Now we have both images one on top of the other. I'm gonna inspect just so we can see what's going on exactly. We see that both image containers are placed one on top of the other, and each image container has inside of it its respective image. So in this case, image container 2 is on top of image container 1. Now I want to be able to resize image container 2, and as I resize it, I want it to cut off a piece of the picture that's inside of it. So let's see how we can achieve this exactly. We can start, for example, targeting image container 2 and giving it a width. And let's see what happens when I give it a width. By default, image container 2 has a width of around 627 or 28 pixels. So let's see what happens if I give it a width of 500 pixels, for example. So I gave it a width of 500 pixels. The image container went down to 500 pixels instead of 600 pixels, but the image that's inside it is ignoring the container it's in, and it's overflowing basically. So this is not what I want exactly. What I want is that as the image container gets smaller, it should cut the picture that's inside of it. I don't want to be able to see that extra 100 pixel that is protruding from the right of the image container 2. I can give the image container 2, the one that I resized, I can give it an overflow of hidden. And let's see what happens when I do that. And this is pretty much, you can start seeing this is the beginning of what I want to achieve basically. So for example, now I'll try giving it a 300 pixel instead of 500. And yeah, that's what I want basically. As I resize the image container 2, it cuts the picture inside of it and starts revealing the picture that's underneath, which is the picture in container 1. Okay, so now we are doing this manually by changing styles in CSS, but what I want to do is actually have this happen programmatically when I hover my mouse over the picture itself. So let's start removing the widths that I gave to the image container manually. And instead, let's create an event listener on the outer container. I'll be adding the attribute on mouse move. And this is an event that pretty much triggers every time when I'm hovering my mouse over the outer container or any of the elements that are inside of the outer container really. So let's see this in action. On mouse move, I'll call a function that's called resize container. At the moment, I still don't have this function, so I'll go ahead and define it at the end of my HTML document. I'll create a script section and I'll do a function of resize container. When I trigger the function resize container, I want it to send me the event that's triggering this function. So to do this, on mouse move, we'll have to have the argument event. And in my definition of resize container, I also have to receive an event. And let's see what am I receiving exactly in this event. So let's log the event to the console. And let's see what happens now when I move my mouse over the image. And I'm gonna switch to the console here in my dev tools. And this is what happens when I'm moving my mouse over the image, or actually over the outer container, or any of the elements that are inside the outer container. So let's see what am I receiving here exactly. I'm receiving a mouse event that has like all of these properties, but more specifically, it has a property that says offset X and offset Y. And this is what I really care about here in this case. So the offset X is gonna tell me the X coordinates of the mouse, and I'm gonna use this to resize the image container just like I did manually at the beginning. But this time I'm just going to be using the coordinates that I'm receiving inside my event over here. So first of all, I have to get in my script a reference to the image container width. So I'll start by declaring a constant. I'll call the constant image container 2, for example. And I'll use a document.query selector to get the reference to the image container using the class of the image container, which is image-container2. So when the script runs inside of my image container constant, I have a reference to the image container 2, and now I can use it inside of my function. Okay, so I'll be logging my offset of X so I can see exactly the X coordinates that I'm gonna be using as my image container width. So as you can see, as my mouse gets closer to the left, the coordinates get smaller and smaller until they reach 0. And when I go to the right, they get bigger and bigger until I reach 625, that's around like 625, that's the width of the image. Okay, so let's use this e.offsetx as the width of my image container 2. So I'll do this by getting the constant that contains the reference to the image container 2, going to the style property of that reference, and then going to the width of that style property and assigning the e.offset x, and I'll save. And let's see what happens now when I move my mouse. Okay, so at the moment I realized that nothing happens when I hover the mouse over the picture. And I went ahead and inspected what I was doing here, and I realized I'm not passing a string in pixels. At the moment I'm just passing a number. And this is not how it works. You need to add like the units at the end, and this will convert everything that you're passing over here to a string and assign it to the width. So now that I do e.offset plus pixels, and as you can see now, when I hover my mouse over the image, it goes from one image to the other. Now, just to make it more visually appealing, I'll be adding a little bit of border to the image container 2. Like I'll go over to image container 2 styles and do like a border right, and give it like a let's say a 4 pixel solid black, for example, just so we can see when one picture ends and the other is beginning. I put like this little border over here. So I also noticed like we have a little problem now, that as I move my mouse to the right where the picture ends, the divider will keep on moving too. So we can fix this by putting a limit to how much to the right we want this line to move. Like we don't want this to happen pretty much. I don't want my line to overflow the images. So as we said, the maximum width of the images was 620 or 625. So I can put a restriction inside of my function here and have it not trigger or not do anything after the offset reaches 625. So I can set a limit here to my e.offsetx to have it or only trigger if we're under 625. After we hit like 625, I don't want the function to do anything anymore. So I'll put my image.style.width inside of this. And now if we exceed the 625 pixels, it's not going to do anything. As long as we're inside the 625 pixels, it's going to switch from one picture to the other. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. I don't know, I just thought it was like a little interesting effect that you can achieve with a few lines of code. And I hope you guys found it interesting or maybe enjoyed watching. And yeah, that's it for now. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.